All right, Shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahushai, Bahasham, Rakha Kudash. Double honors to the elders and the apostles of Great Millstone, and peace and blessings to the elect. And we're back with some more headlines here as things are starting to pick up. So starting off, dealing with, I think this was today actually, where Trump orders Navy to shoot and kill Iranian boats, which that's an interesting way of putting it because boats are inanimate, right? Boats are not living. You can't kill boats. But I would assume that's basically destroy the boats and, of course, those that are piloting or controlling them anyway. Says doesn't need a deal as U.S. intercepts tankers from Hormuz to Indian Ocean. And really, when you look at how the U.S. is positioned right now, you can sort of see why he would say that, right? They've implemented a blockade in the body of water right where the Strait of Hormuz is, and they have also positioned themselves very close enough to even decide if they wanted to go do a ground invasion, which they will. Go ahead, right? Like they are now having, if you really take a bird's eye view, so to speak, when they started, they weren't really, they had some artillery there, but it wasn't to this extent, right? Now they have this artillery in there. They have this blockade, which they can basically use that to say, now we control that strait. And they've positioned themselves, reinforced, reset their ammunition, all of that stuff. So interesting now that he would say, that they don't need a deal. But let's read a little bit of this here. So Iranian sources to Chinese state media says breakthrough toward restarting U.S. talks again could come tonight or tomorrow, which interesting that they would say that, right? Because we'll look at what the next headline says over there. And like I've said before, this is, the Iranians could very well be taking a page out of the U.S.'s book, right? Like, hey, well, we can also manipulate markets too, all right? Because this is a two-way street, Trump orders U.S. Navy to shoot and kill small Iranian boats. Amid concern over mines in Hormuz, says U.S. now doesn't need a deal, whatever the details of that means. Overnight, U.S. military intercepted 2 more Iranian oil supertankers that tried to evade the blockade. And in Indian Ocean, U.S. conducted a maritime interdiction and right of visit boarding of the sanctioned stateless vessels, M/T Majestic X transporting oil from Iran. So they're basically stealing that. Media sources confirm, based on prior Trump posts, that the U.S. has extended the ceasefire indefinitely until a unified proposal can be brought forward by Tehran. Iran announces first Hormuz tolls paid to the country's central bank. So that's interesting. When it comes to, at this point, whether, their ceasefire talks, their extensions of it, you can pretty much throw that out the window. Forget about that. Look at what it is that they're doing, okay? And I think people are starting to see that. They're starting to see through that now, that it's not really having that potent of an effect as it did before, right? Because at first it was like, oh, they're going at it. Oh, okay, there's a ceasefire. Oh, and markets were like jumping super high, right? But now people are starting to see like, okay. We see what game you're getting at here. So next, this is a post from Amichai Steen, which says here, Israel's defense minister, Israel Katz, says Israel is preparing to resume the war against Iran. We are awaiting a green light from the United States. First and foremost, and I did a lesson a couple days back about how they mentioned that from the perspective of Israel, they're not done, right? From their perspective, they're definitely not done. And they're not the kind of people that just say, yeah, it didn't really go our way the first time around, let's call it a day. And that's not how it works. So And we know behind the scenes who's really pulling the strings anyway. First and foremost, to complete the elimination of the Khamenei family and push Iran back into a dark age. This time, the strike will be different, far more lethal, delivering devastating blows at the most sensitive points, ones that will shake and undermine its very foundations. So that's interesting, talk coming from the Israeli defense minister here concerning what at least their stance is about Iran and the state of affairs right now. Okay, as Trump just made this order that we just read about. So, we'll keep our eyes open, right, and see how things play out within the next couple of days to weeks, and how they go. But as we've seen that pattern, every time there's an escalation, it seems to be more and more and more major than the one that preceded it. Next, we have your UK and France leading 30-nation military push to reopen Strait of Hormuz, which is interesting now because a couple weeks ago, Trump was calling for this, right? And they said, yeah, no, we're not going to do that. They ain't got nothing to do with us. That's your problem. You fix it. So now that there is a U.S. military blockade over there in that body of water, it's going to be pretty interesting to see how this plays in with that, right? And sort of how that goes. So reading a little bit of this here, the UK is hosting yesterday and today a 2-day multinational conference convening military planners from more than 30 countries as Britain and France renew efforts to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. Now, what you're starting to see here is it's like being on a ship, right? And you're maybe it's like misty out and you're approaching your destination or whatnot. And you know what the land overall should look like. So as you get closer and closer, you start to see the shape of it, right? And as you get closer and closer, you start to see, the detailed parts of it. Because it looks small from afar, but you can pick out, okay, this part looks taller. Okay, this part looks shorter. Okay, that looks like a bridge. That looks like a skyscraper. That looks like a tower and so on, right? It looks like a lighthouse and blah, blah, blah. So that's what you're starting to see here, right? With the way current events are moving, right? The ship is going closer and closer to that land, to that destination. And that's why current events are starting to sound more and more like prophecy every day, because that's the destination, right? The fulfillment is when your current events in the world meet with prophecy, right? When they finally meet, when they merge together, okay, into one. Because prophecy is telling you what is going to happen, what's at the end, what's your destination. And right now, the current events are the ship that's headed to that destination, but eventually it's going to merge into one, right? Eventually, the present time will catch up with what's been prophesied, all right? And then it's gonna continue on from that point going forward, okay? So it says here, you have this more than 30 countries being led by Britain and France in an effort to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. But it seems like that's not really the only thing you got to worry about now. I mean, depending on how cooperative Trump is going to be with that blockade, because he can really take it anywhere he wants now with it. The 2-day conference takes place just as U.S. President Donald Trump late on Tuesday extended the U.S.-Iran ceasefire until negotiations with Iran conclude, one way or the other. Now, it's kind of interesting because you say you don't need a deal, but then you're saying you're extending a ceasefire indefinitely or however long until they can get their stuff together and then come and make a deal with you. But you just said you don't need a deal. So what's going on there? That's that double speak, Hopes of U.S.-Iran negotiations resuming as early as Wednesday were dashed after reports emerged that the trip of U.S. and this was the past Wednesday, the trip of U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance to Pakistan, which hosted the previous round of failed talks, has been put on hold. As early as Wednesday, there were no signs that the talks could resume soon. And then it goes on, really tells us things we kind of already know about there. Okay, so the next one here. Now, this is part of what I meant by the current events starting to look more and more like prophecy, right? Like somebody's just painting a picture, and then at first it just looks like slobs of paint of different colors in different areas, and then they start to eventually blend it all in together. Then you start to see the image. You're like, oh, this is looking pretty good. So here it says outrage after von der Leyen groups Turkey into malign axis with Russia and China. And what this basically was in speaking the way she spoke about I think this is that lady right there. Yeah. The way she spoke about Turkey was like almost like when you say us versus them, and then the them is you lumping Turkey and China and Russia together. Now, there's outrage here about it, but she's not wrong because that's ultimately where Turkey is going to be, according to Ezekiel, the 38th chapter. You see? So it says here, Turkey's government, because that's the thing, like there are certain key things that need to happen. When you look ahead and you look at the prophecies, where like certain pieces are moved, right? Certain pieces are not in the place they are now. So as you get closer and closer to the fulfillment of that prophecy, you start to see that these pieces become they start to become more talked about, right? There's some events that start to culminate circling this piece here because something needs to happen to move it to where it's supposed to be at the fulfillment of this prophecy, i.e. Turkey, which is a NATO member, being on the side of Russia and China. So something needs to happen here. So her grouping Turkey with them is not random, right? Why? It's not like it was an accident. That was on purpose. And then you look at how Israel has been speaking against Turkey. You start to see that, and then how Turkey's also been responding, saying like, look, we're not, you Israelis are basically doing things that are unlawful against Iran. So really, when you look at it from a reasonable standpoint, Iran is not in the wrong. So it's kind of already like the way that they're positioning themselves from their point of view, the way that certain other people, let me just use that general term, are referencing them. Like Israel's already talking about Turkey as like they're the next Iran. So what does that kind of where does that kind of put you? Because if the U.S. is doing whatever Israel wants, and Turkey is a part of NATO, but you can see how Trump's attitude towards NATO is fracturing their relationship between the U.S. and NATO. In fact, I saw a headline that mentioned the U.S. basically coming up with this, like, so to speak, naughty and nice list for countries in NATO. So anyway, let me read a little bit of this here. Turkey's government, as well as some members of the European Parliament on Wednesday, criticized recent remarks by European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, suggesting Europe should not fall under the influence of Russia, Turkey, or China, calling the comments misleading and divisive. So it's kind of like if somebody was to say, right, speaking about, let's say you had a Democratic, I don't know, senator speaking about another Democratic senator, and they're speaking against, I don't know, some communism or something like that, or some dangerous leaders. And then one Democratic senator says, well, you want to be careful of people amassing too much power with crazy ideologies. And then they start listing like crazy or famous dictators, right, that people don't really like. And then they lump in that other Democratic senator's name with them. People going to start looking at him like, whoa, right? Because you're now saying like you had your Joseph, was it Stalin? and your Lenins and your Mao Zedongs and I'm just throwing names out here for the example's sake, and your Genghis Khans and your John Smiths. And then people gonna look at you like, wait, but he's another Democratic senator. Why are you lumping him? Why are you lumping his name in with these guys? See, so that's kind of like what, even though she didn't explicitly say like, Turkey's an enemy. If you're speaking about a nation that's supposed to be an ally, grouped up with nations that are not allies, then I mean it doesn't take a rocket scientist to read between the lines there. And I think that's why they have this outrage here. But like I said before, according to prophecy and how things are going to play out, which we're watching closely, she's not wrong. Okay, in the sense of grouping Turkey with them, because Turkey will be grouped with them. So it says here, von der Leyen on Monday had casually grouped NATO members or NATO member Turkey with China and Russia as malign influences on the continent, which contradicts the fact that the EU has relied on Turkey to play a key diplomatic role in the Ukraine war, as well as to absorb war refugees from the Middle East. She had in the remarks declared that the EU must succeed in completing the European continent so that it is not influenced by Russia, Turkey, or China. And some people hear that and they're like, oh no, that's too crazy. That ain't no, guess what? A couple years back, they said the same thing about the events that are happening right now. No, that's not gonna happen. No, they wouldn't do that. No, that's too crazy. Well, you're living in it. And that's because things don't happen according to your reasonable foresight. Well, based on history and probability and logic, it doesn't look likely to happen. No, things happen according to the will of the writer of the story. And we're living in a story written by the Lord. So things happen according to what he has decided will happen. As unlikely to you as that may seem, how many things throughout history, what's interesting about that is, when you see the outcome of what seems like an impossible situation, all of a sudden the situation doesn't seem so impossible because you already have an outcome in mind. But put it that you place yourself before there was an outcome, before there was some way out, some solution. It seemed impossible. It seemed like, no, there's no way that this can happen. But once there is an action taken or a solution, it seems like, oh yeah, that's the only logical way to handle this situation. Okay, so the point there is that even in history, there have been very, very unlikely things, like things that seem like completely impossible. That would be crazy to do, and then boom, it ends up happening, exactly like that. How do you think the people who were there before it happened felt? Did you think they thought that it would happen? No. Just like people today don't think some of these events are going to take place the way that they're prophesied to. But you're no different than those in the past, okay? Because it will take place just as it has been prophesied to. So next, UBS warns drought shock unfolding across breadbasket of America. And this is basically going into the water drying up, right? I'll read a little bit of this here. Now, this is not a good thing, right? Because this coupled with the whole friction and tension around the LNG and fertilizers and so on, that's not good for food security, that is, right? UBS warns, it says, it is not just us sounding the alarm about severe drought conditions hitting America's breadbasket as spring plantings ramp up, or warning about the second and third order effects that could push food prices higher later this year. UBS analysts led by Jonathan Pingle told clients on Thursday morning that drought conditions across the U.S. agricultural belt rank among the worst in more than 130 years. That is a long time. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's Palmer Drought Severity Index, hit its highest level for March since records started in 18 not even 19, 1895. And March was the third driest month recorded, regardless of time of year. Cool, good stuff. Now, I'm going to read this here real quick. When you read Isaiah, the 19th chapter, right, Isaiah 19, though it mentions Egypt here, you know, the things mentioned here are really prophetic, right, and in application to the modern day Egypt, right, which is America. And when you read in Revelation, the 11th chapter, you can make the connection from there, right, as it connects that great city, which is Babylon, aka America, to being spiritually Sodom and Egypt. So this place is that spiritual Egypt. Now, what was said or prophesied against this place, right, in the sort of metaphorical speak of relating it to Egypt, because there are a lot of similarities between the two, is droughts as well, right? In Isaiah 19, when you jump down to verse 5, it says, "And the waters shall fail from the sea, and the river shall be wasted and dried up, and they shall turn the rivers far away, and the brooks of defense shall be emptied and dried up." Now, when you have bodies of water like reservoirs and so on, those are, when it says defense, like you have those for, just like you would save up money for a rainy day, you have bodies of water that are used for actual energy, but also for like emergency source of water. So when you start having these droughts, like these major droughts, they're talking about something so severe, like in 130 years, that's letting you know along, right, coupled with all these other major prophetic signs happening at the same time, this isn't a one-off event. This isn't an outlier. This isn't by coincidence. The Lord is preparing the time of great sorrows, otherwise known as Jacob's trouble, which we are in. But we're getting, when you see, a lot of people don't see it yet because it's not at the height, right? It's not at the peak. If you take if anybody's watched Game of Thrones, when you look at Daenerys, right, and I'm talking about the main Game of Thrones story, when she first got the dragons, right, the spoiler alert if you haven't seen it, the dragons were small, right, when they hatched. Because she had the eggs, right? When they hatched, they was tiny. They look cute, right? Little tiny little ones. Fire breathing was like, look. You fast forward a couple of seasons, those same dragons, they were not looking so cute. They went from perched up on her shoulders to her riding on their back, and they're freaking burning up battlefields and all that. I mean, dangerous, right? Huge, huge, huge creatures. So it's when it hits its peak that people really identify, like the fear sets in when that dragon is now full grown, breathing out fire on your ass, right? Likewise, we're in Jacob's trouble, but it doesn't really register in people's minds, right? The effect doesn't really kick in because just like the dragon, it was a dragon, it existed, it was there, but it was small. So it wasn't really a problem. But once Jacob's trouble starts to pick up that steam and hit the peak, because the peak point of Jacob's trouble is what the prophets ended up seeing, right? At the most devastating parts. And once it hits that point, that's when people are going to start to understand the kind of trouble they're in. But that's way, way, way too late. If you wait till this dragon is a full-grown beast and you hear Dracarys, you're cooked, quite literally, because that fire is going to roast the skin off your ass. And if there's any bones that are not melted, that is what's going to be left. So you got people that think that it's going to be all right until Jacob's trouble hits its peak, and then they want to try to, find a way out. That's a recipe for destruction. Where are we at? Verse, I'm going to read 6 again. It says, "And they shall turn the rivers far away, and the brooks of defense shall be emptied and dried up, and reeds and flags shall wither." And believe it or not, as easily accessible as water is, people don't even think about the use of water. People do not, most people don't drink water. Like if say you go to your bathroom to brush your teeth, most people don't drink that water over there, right? People barely even drink tap water, right? They'll either maybe have some filter or something like that. You use that, or you buy water or whatever the case is. But it's easily accessible, right? You can even go into a certain store and just ask for a cup and just say, hey, if they have those little soda machines, can I get some water? You just pour some water and drink. So it's very far out of people's minds that you're gonna have some people that are actually gonna die because they're not gonna have access to water, not even to drink. In a place where they take water for granted so much that there are some people that just don't even drink water. They just drink soda and juice. They don't even drink water. Imagine that. My goodness, that is crazy. Okay, but that same water that is, you can find it on every corner, so much so that people even try to avoid it, is going to be scarce. All right, it's going to be scarce. One more verse. It says, the paper reads by the brooks, by the mouth of the brooks, and everything sown by the brooks shall wither, be driven away, and be no more, because they depend on water to grow. All right, so where are we at? Right, we read about the drought warnings. Another interesting thing here is Anthropic, right? And you have, ChatGPT, right, which is the company for that is OpenAI. Anthropic, they also have their models like Claude, and different models and so on, right? So there was a model that they were working on called Mythos, which they claimed was too dangerous to release to the public, right? That's what they said. And the danger in it lied in the fact that it's not like your basic model that just thinks or reasons, or you talk to it like you're talking to ChatGPT. This one was, I guess it's more trained to be able to do more dangerous things like cyber attacks, hacking, and so on and so forth. So it says here, the Anthropic's too dangerous to release AI model was accessed by Discord group on day one. Now, I did a lesson a couple days back where Sam Altman was asked, is it basically, could we see I forgot how it was worded, how a ground shaking, earth shattering, something cyber attack this year? And he said yes. And he said that because you have these powerful models and it just takes the wrong people or bad actors just to get into their hands. And mind you, these are people that already know how to hack. They know how to set up DDoS and DOS attacks, which is denial of service, where they basically overload certain systems with, internet requests, whatever, and then it basically crashes, right? Like they have way different kinds of tools to hack on a regular. Imagine having that on steroids by having access to a model like this, right? So that's why he said that. Now, what's interesting is this group that accessed this super dangerous model, they said that they didn't really use it for anything crazy. They're just using it for like create websites and, just basic testing of it. But if a group can access it, do you not think a group that has more malicious intents can access it? So it says here, Anthropic's Mythos model is extraordinarily dangerous. The company itself warned that it could autonomously, that means by itself, identify and exploit zero-day vulnerabilities in every major operating system, every major web browser, and every critical software library on Earth. My goodness. Now, all your devices, from your phone, your tablet, your computer, your TV, they all have an operating system. Okay, your operating system, just think of it like the software that allows you to talk to the, when you wanna use your computer or your tablet, there's a reason why you have like a keyboard or a touch screen, right? Or a monitor or speaker, right? So you talk to your machine through, typing on the keyboard, right? Or using a mouse. You click on a certain application, say YouTube or Google Chrome, and when you double click, you're telling the machine, hey, open this application so I can use it. And then what the machine does is it shows you on the screen what it's doing, what its response is, right? And it uses the speaker so you can hear what its output is, right? So you use the microphone to like say something. Sometimes you have a smart TV, right? So you press the button and then you speak in and then it uses the microphone to then tell the machine, hey, go and do this. The user wants to open, I don't know, YouTube. So you open YouTube, or Netflix, so you open Netflix. So the operating system is what's allowing all that to happen. If you don't have an operating system, your ass better be knowing binary code, 11001110. That's how you would be using your TV and tablet and phone. But you don't got to do that because you have an operating system. So all of your devices have an operating system. That means that they're vulnerable because majority of the devices you use, whether it's an Apple device, LG, Android, Samsung, they're using major operating systems, right? So whether it's like Linux or whatever the case is. So that's let's say vulnerable to this Mythos model in the wrong hands. Any web browser, Google Chrome, Safari, Mozilla Firefox, X, Y, and Z, that can also be hacked. And when it says vulnerabilities, what it means is imagine you're in a castle and you think that it's locked down tight, but there's one stone, one brick somewhere that's just a little loose. And a thief or a crook or a bandit finds that stone, pushes it, and then they get access. There's a little hole now in your castle, and they can use that to start breaking a bigger piece and sneak into your castle, and now you're in danger. So that small brick that wasn't fully stable is a vulnerability. And what hackers do, or what this model can do, is it can very quickly find the little chinks in your armor to get through, right? So your little security code and all that won't work because they find the different vulnerabilities in there. So long story short, it's a dangerous model. At least that's what they're claiming. But I'm going to read a little bit more here. It says, and because of this offensive cybersecurity power, Anthropic refused to release Mythos publicly and instead tightly restricted access through Project Glasswing to roughly 50 carefully vetted organizations. But you see, you can only be careful so much, right? Like you can't be 100% on everything. 12 named launch partners plus more than 40 additional critical software and government entities, including the U.S. National Security Agency. That's the NSA. Yet within hours of the limited rollout announcement on April 7th, 2026, a small group of unauthorized users in a private Discord server had already broken in. Because you still have social engineering, right? Like hackers sometimes get access into, they'll say, okay, you know what? Obviously, we can't get access to this model directly from Anthropic, but we may know one or two or three of their vetted organizations. So we'll just get access to those vetted organizations and then boom, we got access to it, right? You call them, you act like you're one of the employees there, you ask certain questions. Because see, humans, that's why it's called social engineering, right? Humans are susceptible to certain like irrational behaviors. That's how scammers get people. You ever been scammed and then later on you think about it and you're like, that was very stupid of me. Like, how did I even fall for that? Like, now that I'm thinking about it, that didn't even make sense. Why the hell did I listen to this person or do this or do that? Because in the moment they used certain tactics. They made it seem urgent. They used fear. They rushed you so you're not thinking properly, and then you gave in. That's like how social engineering works. Like they can manipulate people. So they do that, right? They get access into certain buildings. They get certain information, get access from certain people, reach out on LinkedIn. All those kinds of things, right? And then they do that. Long story short here, when you come to this model that they're talking about, it's interesting to me that just recently Sam Altman just, basically made that statement. And now they're letting you know that, hey, by the way, this super dangerous model that we didn't want to release to the public, it can potentially be in the hands of the public now anyway, because people can still get access to it, right? So I wouldn't be surprised if the trend of cyber attacks, scale, like they start to increase very rapidly and be more, effective or dangerous with the use of models like this, or even similar models like this that are not tightly locked down. The last headline here just sounds like something straight out of GTA 5 or GTA is two armed robbers steal $1.8 million from Brinks armored truck in Philadelphia. And this happened in broad daylight. right? It says two masked men armed with rifles carried out a brazen daylight robbery of a Brinks armored truck in the Tacony section of Northeast Philadelphia, escaping with what authorities say could be as much as $1.8 million in cash. What's interesting about this is happening at a time when, one, people are desperate. Two, it's you have like a surge in this confidence of violent attacks, brazen actions that are being taken by the public, and it's letting you know like society is descending into this kind of like setting here, where now you got people that are like I said, it sounds like a mission from GTA, like a daylight heist, broad daylight heist, where you go and you do this, and people are starting to realize that it's a bit easier now than it was in the past, because now you have a lot more problems to worry about. I mean, as a society, your economy is tanking. You're involved in this like war with Iran. You had this whole defund police campaign going on. Police are not as effective. Certain things in certain states, they're just like, we're not even going to show up for. So it's nothing, like things aren't really working tightly and, cohesively to have a nice tight lockdown society where crime rates are very low. So you have things like this, right? And it's not just in the US. You also have different kinds. I think in Europe, what they're having really there is like a sexual assault epidemic, all right, where like every 2 seconds there's a woman getting assaulted. And then they'll claim it's by some asylum seeker or some migrant or, whatever is going on over there. And then it's kind of like become the norm because the authorities and law enforcement, they just either sweep it under the rug, target the victim, or they just tell you, look, we'll queue it up and we'll take a look at it maybe in 10 years or something. So this is pretty much what the world is coming to. All right, if you've been watching, you're starting to see the trend of the theme in the news. Like it's not you're hearing more and more negative, more and more evils, more and more dangerous headlines than you are the opposite. And that's because this is the time of prophecy, right? This is the theme of the prophecy that we're in. So what would behoove you is to brace your mind, prepare your mind, looking ahead and seeing what the forecast looks like. You should start preparing, now for that time, understanding that the only way to make it out of these dangerous times is through the Heavenly Father, because the Lord is the one bringing this danger, and your only safety is to be exempted from it. But if you try to lean on your own strength, thinking I got a bug out bag or, a hideout place in the mountains or a nuclear bunker, whatever it is that you're thinking in your mind, trust and believe the Creator knows, far more than whatever plan you got going on. And if you're on his hit list, you're not making it. All right. So I'm going to end it there. Lord willing, that was edifying and informative to the elect. In closing, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham Yahushai, Bahasham, Rechak Kodesh. And until next time, Shalom.